Mozambique's elections results have been overturned. This as it appears that the vote favouring the ruling Liberation Front of Mozambique was rigged. Despite the political instability at a 6-year high, the East African nation is thriving economically. Louw Nel, who's senior political analyst at Oxford Economics Africa, joins us with his analysis of Mozambique's political landscape. Louw, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time.
Afternoon.
All right, I'm keen to understand here what was at stake here with the local election, and how did the Election Commission get the results wrong?
Well, the Mozambique local election very much flew below the radar this year, largely because there have been so many other prominent elections there. The Zimbabwe election in August, Eswatini, and then most recently presidential election in presidential election in Madagascar. I think that not a lot of people were paying attention to what was happening in Mozambique. The significance for the local elections extends into next year, when they will have their general elections in October next year. And so I think in many people's minds, the main opposition in Mozambique, Renamo, is something of a spent force, which isn't exactly the case. Renamo is still a significant factor in Mozambican election, perhaps not strong enough to defeat Frelimo in next year's election, but they would fancy their chances, and they knew that a good showing in the local elections would set them up for the elections next year. Also, as an aside, this was also the first election that Mozambique held since the demobilization of Renamo fighters concluded in June this year. So some people described it as Mozambique's first peacetime election. It was significant from that perspective. But the election results that was released by the CNE, the provisional results, days after the election on October 11th, showed that Frelimo had won 64 of the country's 65 elections. The only one that didn't win was in Beira, where the MDM has been in charge for 20 years and was always likely to retain control of Beira. But Renamo immediately cried foul. They pointed out that the election results didn't gel with their parallel counts. And they were particularly upset about Maputo, because they thought they were in pretty good shape to actually win in the capital, which is quite a remarkable thing if you consider the dynamics of the country. Renamo's support has historically been more to the north of the country, and they had a very good showing in Maputo. And so on October 26th, the final results were declared by CNE, no changes, again, 64 of the 65 awarded to Frelimo. At that point, Renamo had already gone to certain district courts challenging those results, sometimes successfully, mostly not. But then it had to be validated by the Constitutional Council. And then so on November 24th, the Constitutional Council came back and had annulled the results in 4 of those municipalities, including Kelemani, which is the provincial capital of Zambezia up north, and 3 other municipalities, which then awarded to Renamo. They ordered the rerun in 1 town and a rerun in certain polling stations in 3 more. And they also shifted votes around in certain locations, but those shifts didn't result in a change in the final results. Significantly, that was Maputo and Matola, which is neighboring Matola next to Maputo. And that's, I think, Renamo was very disappointed. I think they were hoping that might be a significant shift in Maputo. The long and the short of it is, prior to the election, Renamo was in charge of 8 municipalities. They're now in charge of 4. Perhaps it could be more. With the original results, would have suggested that Renamo was a spent force and that they were nowhere. But it also meant that Renamo was threatening not to participate in next year's election, which would have been a disastrous outcome, considering that there's been relative peace in the country since the 2019 peace agreement was signed. And the leaders of the 2 parties have been playing nice and have been pulling in the same direction. I think in many ways, Frelimo shouldn't worry about being defeated by Renamo. It's not going to happen, I don't think. But it was something of a rather deliberate steal, as it were. And so it has really undermined the CNE and the STAE, which is their implementation body. And so the Electoral Council Commission and the guys who are in charge of it are now calling for these guys to be removed or to step down, because they simply can't have them in charge of another election, considering what a mess this one.
It's a very interesting dynamic you paint for us here, because all of this happens while the Mozambican economy is thriving, Louw. Speak to us about, what's led to the country's fortunes over this period and just generally.
Well, thriving might be overstating it ever so slightly. It is doing well. It's coming off a low base, so the numbers maybe needs to reflect that. We saw in Q3 that the year-on-year growth was at 6%, which is terrific stuff. Compared to Q2 was at 4.8, and all of this has made us rethink our forecast for the year. We currently have our forecast of the year forecasting the country to grow at 5.1%. Previously, we had them at 4.4. I think as South Africans, we would love to see those kind of numbers here. But part of the story of why the economy is doing so well, part of it is the natural gas deposits off the Rovuma Basin. There's a lot written about the instability in Cabo Delgado and the Total Energies project that is shuttered and still hasn't restarted. But Eni's offshore platform, the Coral South FLNG platform, has been producing gas and has been exporting gas since December last year. And so the main growth we've been seeing is in mining and quarrying, which will include the gas, of course, grew 43% year on year in the third quarter. And so some of the revenues from this natural gas is starting to come through, starting to make its way into the fiscus. And at the same time, there's been a rebound in agriculture. We're also seeing some numbers, some growth in areas that might only come through in subsequent quarters or years. Some of the reconstruction that's taking place where the tropical storms caused so much devastation earlier in the year. So that might not necessarily go into the numbers right now, but there's a lot of construction taking place. If Total Energies decides to go ahead with their project, as we absolutely anticipate, it might only start in the first quarter next year. It will take some time before that project, which is much larger than the Eni project, will start producing gas. But in the meantime, at the very least, there will be some construction, there will be some gains for the country. But gas exports might only come online maybe 2027. But it shows just how much these projects can contribute towards the economy and how much it can change the picture in a country like Mozambique. Again, because they're coming off a low base. But the numbers are encouraging, and they seem to. The economy doesn't seem to be paying a lot of attention to what's happening on the political front.
Very, very encouraging. Unfortunately, it's all we have time for today, Louw, but thank you so much for taking us through this very interesting development there for our neighbours in Mozambique. That was Louw Nel. He's Senior Political Analyst for Oxford Economics Africa.